Okay, so I'm back with another critique video, and this one's taken me embarrassingly long to get to, but I never forgot about it, so here we are. Now, this submission comes from Rain, and Rain says, I wanted to know if you ever draw with a perspective grid, or if you mainly focus on overlapping shapes and their relationship with each other. Also, I was curious on how you come up with so many interesting and cool poses. Do you already have them in your head, or does it come to you as you're drawing? Thank you for all your tutorials and insight, as you've definitely helped improve my art a lot. So first of all, thank you, Rain. I'm glad you find my poses interesting and cool. But to answer your first question, the simple answer is no. I don't draw with the perspective grid, however, I do always keep it in mind. So while it may not necessarily be on the screen as I'm working, I see it in my head, and so the perspective that is in play in my drawings is entirely intuitive in a way, and it all comes from just like a feeling. And to answer your second question, I think about 80% of the time, give or take, the poses that I draw are entirely poses that I just make up myself. However, I do always have references in front of me when I draw, so even though I may not be using a reference to copy it one-to-one, I still refer to the references just to refresh my own visual library. But now onto the drawing that you submitted, Rain. I like this pose actually, and I like this character, and this is like the kind of character design approach that I find myself using personally because this character looks like he'd be easy to draw again and again, and so I found that aspect of this drawing very appealing to me. Now it's funny actually that you mentioned a perspective grid in your submission, because when I look at this drawing, I think the one thing that jumps out at me the most, and the thing that's kind of throwing me off, is in fact the perspective of this drawing. And I think the reason is because the character itself is following a perspective wherein which we're looking up at the character. And in other words, this character is following a low angle perspective. And this is pretty evident just by looking at the way that you drew the features of the face, where it's clear that you were going for an angle where you'd be able to see like the bottom plane of the nose, and the mouth is upturned as well. Even like the eyes are in a similar angle. And so that much is clear here. And you also even have like a bit of diminution going on here, where you can see, for example, that the hand is bigger than the head and that the foot is bigger than the hand. So you've got this nice hierarchy between the sizes of the different parts of this character that would suggest that he's following a perspective where the convergence point is somewhere above this character. However, the platform that this character is interacting with seemingly does not follow the same perspective. And if I put a line down across the top of the shape and on the side of it, you can see that these lines seemingly just go straight across and straight up without any real angle to them. And so if I were to assume that this here is the other end of the shape, you can see that these lines are completely parallel to each other, which suggests that they will never converge. And in other words, that this shape does not follow any real perspective. And I think that's what's throwing me off when I look at this drawing, Rain, because again, the character is being affected by perspective, but the platform the character is interacting with does not. And so it makes the image as a whole a bit incoherent in that way. And I think this is also why, as a result, the character's proportions from top to bottom look to be a bit more stretched than normal. So if I were to approach drawing a similar pose to yours, Rain, I think from the outset I would decide on a perspective that the platform itself will follow and draw the character according to that perspective as well, just so that the overall image looks like it's part of the same scene, like the same environment. So I'd start with the platform, which in this case will follow a 3-point perspective, and then with the character, again, I draw him in a way that roughly adheres to that same perspective that is affecting the platform. And I say roughly because I'm not actually using a grid here, so the perspective can be slightly off here and there, but I find that when you're drawing organic shapes like people or even animals, you can actually have a lot of leeway, and in fact, your drawings don't need to really adhere to a perspective grid that precisely for an audience to understand that your subjects are in perspective, if you know what I mean. Like, you know perspective when you see it, kind of thing. So here's the drawing that I came up with, and a few things that I kept in mind the entire time was, one, of course, keeping a similar perspective to your original drawing, and two, making sure that the character adheres to that same perspective. For example, making it so that the feet of the character falls on the same planes as the platform, that they're on the same level, making it clear that the character is inhabiting the same space as the platform. So now, if I were to put a perspective point on this drawing to kind of proofread it, you can see that our box does indeed follow that low to the ground eye level that we were going for originally, and that parts of the character itself sort of line up to that perspective as well. And actually, if we put down another convergence point, again, our box lines up to that point as well, and even things like the hand, the knee, and the head all sort of converge together between those 2 points, and so that the lines all cross on those parts respectively. And so all this again is to just reinforce that the character and the box adhere to the same perspective. And then by adding a third point up at the top, that's when you can kind of adjust a few things about the platform itself and other kind of stuff so that it also adheres to that perspective too. So if I were to come back to your original drawing, Rain, I think if I were to try and make adjustments to it, it would be a bit harder, I fear, to get it all the way cohesive, as this is something that you'd have needed to account for at the start of the drawing, as opposed to trying to fix it at the end of it. So here I'm adjusting the leg so that the rear foot is on the same surface plane as the platform, and I wanted to say that there are times where 2 aspects of your drawing won't need to be, or that it wouldn't necessarily be on the same surface plane, but being that it is that's the rear foot, it's the foot that is the farthest from us. So based off of that alone, it wouldn't be, in my opinion, too far-fetched to assume that the rear foot would be farther back and would be portrayed as such as opposed to the platform that is in front of the rear foot. And with the other foot, I think I'd do a similar thing in adjusting the angle of the foot so that it too is seen from a 2-point perspective as opposed to straight horizontally like it was before. Now, Rain, what's funny about this drawing is that you actually follow a 2-point perspective already with this shadow that you added here, because the shadow itself is describing a point of convergence off to the side when you line up the shadow with the character. But again, the platform was not affected by either convergence point. So my advice here, I guess overall, would be to keep the consistency between all aspects of the drawing. Every element from the character to the environment will all add up to an image that will ultimately look cohesive and not disjointed. So Rain, that's going to do it for now. Thanks so much for your submission, and thanks for your support on Patreon, and I hope that you found any part of this video helpful at all. And thank you, of course, to everyone for watching, and I'll talk to you guys again as soon as I can.